Welcome to Under the Hood. This is the Cine-mechanic, and today I have a special guest, Mr. Ryan Schaddelee. Did I get that right? Your last name?
That is correct. Thank you.
Great, awesome. Yeah. I feel so proud of myself for doing that. How are you today?
Just swell. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. Now I can't stop staring at your avatar. Can you just explain for the folks at home that this didn't happen to you for real? Like nobody like beat you up or anything, right?
No, that wasn't a car accident or anything like that. No, that was no bar fight. The picture is from a friend of mine, Amber Rhodes, does a cooking show called Cooking for What? With a question mark. And so she does recipes with kind of a story. And so she wanted to do a Halloween one. And she wanted to do a zombie based one. So I just, made myself up as a zombie and, used some contacts and some prosthetics and stuff. So,
well, this is an example of, for the folks at home, what you do, which is an amazing art, which is special makeup effects, along with a bunch of other things. But I think your main claim to fame, if I may call it that, is as a makeup effects artist. Is that right?
That's probably true.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm curious to know what got you involved in that. I mean, what can you give us a bit of the genesis of why you became so fascinated with makeup effects and special effects and all of that?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew why some kids like sports. I wish I knew why some kids, got into, I don't, I've been asking myself the same question for a long time, but I do think it comes down to, a love of horror movies as a kid. I think my dad took me to a lot of, he never took me to R-rated movies, but in the early 80s, like Clash of the Titans and The Dark Crystal and Time Bandits and movies like that, really like, especially The Dark Crystal, I think, and of course Star Wars, the Star Wars movies really made me.
What are those? The Star Wars movies?
Yeah, well, let me give you some backstory here. There's this guy, George Lucas. My dad took me to a lot of these films, and it just opened my eyes to like another whole world of imagery that I didn't understand how it was done. And as an inquisitive child, I wanted to understand how did they do this, and of course, horror movies had more effects than fantasy and sci-fi movies. I mean, there was a lot of those too, but certainly it grew into horror movies. And mostly what I liked was again, the magic trick. How do they do it? And I wanted to figure it out. And I think there's some other psychology there, like, my heavy religious upbringing and, wanting to, be different people and, alter, I was always interested in art, and I always had an artistic inclination, and that all kind of just fed into that. I don't know, I'm not really sure why, but I ultimately it was just figuring out the magic trick, I think, from what I'm seeing, like, wow, how'd they do that? I want to do that. So
was there a particular film that caught your eye in that time period, or was it just a series of movies that culminated in this desire?
I would really have to go back to The Dark Crystal. I think that one just blew my mind. I mean, I'm like, what am I seeing? I felt like they took a camera to another world. I was a big fan of the Muppets as a kid, and knowing that it was Jim Henson, and then seeing this, understanding that it was puppets, but like, my God, like, what the heck? What are they doing? This is at another level. I think that one really. And then also coincidentally, I think like maybe a year or two after the movie came out, there was a traveling show of the art of the Dark Crystal that came to the local art museum. And they had, and so I got to see this stuff in real life, and that really blew my mind because, seeing it on the screen is one thing, but seeing it in real life is another. And this must have been like 83 or 4 or something. And they had one of the Skeksis hands without the skin on it, just so you could see the mechanisms. And then you could puppeteer the hand and make the fingers move. and as an interactive, thing. And that really cemented it for me. I'm like, that's it. I love it. I want to do puppets. I want to make creatures. I want to do special effects. And I would attribute the Dark Crystal to probably this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, you're speaking my language, because The Dark Crystal was one of my favorite films growing up as a kid. Scared the crap out of me.
Yeah. It's so weird.
It is so weird. It is so weird. I just remember, even more so, even not even necessarily. I mean, the creatures were kind of terrifying, but even God, I forget what you call them, like elves or something. The good
The Gelflings.
yeah. It's just the whole vibe of the movie. It had a very sort of it had an otherworldliness, but also a tactility to it that was very, especially versus what you get today, which is just a lot of CG crap. But it was a tactility and a feel to it that just felt very foreign, but also very real, and it just gave me this eerie kind of feeling.
I agree. I thought it was very it's almost slightly off-putting, but fascinating. I mean, it's kind of scary, but intriguing.
Yep.
You kind of love it, but you're kind of sick, I don't know. I think that movie is, I don't think story-wise by any means it's a masterpiece or anything, but just visually and production design and artistically, it is absolutely a masterpiece.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They did a reboot recently on Netflix, I believe. Did you see that?
The Age of Resistance. Yes, I did. I liked it a lot. Good for them. I mean, they obviously did some CG augmentation and some green screen stuff, but mostly it was all puppets, and I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I saw a few episodes, and I mean, this just kind of speaks to the glut of content. I just was never able to keep up with it because there's so much to watch. But what I did see, I was like, oh wow, this is really an impressive throwback to some obviously very cherished and also terrifying memories that I had.
What's the difference?
Yeah, right, exactly. I want to know also, once you got this bug, so to speak, what was there a process of you trying to figure out how to do this stuff? Did you read magazines? Because I know they had a lot of special effects magazines back then. Then.
Yeah.
How did you get your little grubby hands on information about how to do this stuff?
Oh man, definitely the library first and foremost. Got everything I could, but again, I grew up in a small town in Michigan. There wasn't a lot to deal with, or not a lot of options there. But there was some like horror. I can't remember what those. It was like King Kong and Frankenstein and Dracula and the Mummy and Creature from the Black Lagoon, and those books. And I kind of read all those, and then I got some. When I started to figure out how it was done, or how they actually did like the puppetry and stuff. This is more like mid to later '80s. Then the magazines were really coming out. But it was all books and magazines. I would do interlibrary loans once I found out what book I wanted to read. And then of course there was like Cine-mechanic was a good magazine, Cine-fantastique, Starlog, and of course Fangoria. Right. And those were the big ones that I would, ravenously collect and read and get anything I could figure out. And then the back of those magazines were links to, not links, gosh, I'm using the wrong terminology, ads for like other books or places where you could get the materials. And again, of course, and then Tom Savini's book was a big one too, Grand Illusions. That was a big book because he actually listed places to get materials in his book. And so I'm like, okay, so I'm going to get some stuff and I'm going to start playing around.
So you started playing around with makeup and stuff, right?
Yeah.
What was some early designs that you did? Were they fairly simple, or did you try to go complex at first, or how did that start?
Once I actually had a face cast of myself, then I started to figure out, sculpture. And I was using just like the crappy modeling clay, that comes in 4 colors, and I would just mix it all up, so it'd just be this kind of like weird blob of grayish brown, and sculpt with that. And it was terrible clay to work with. But I think one of the first ones I did was Michael Jackson's Thriller. I did that cat, kind of werewolf cat, I guess, makeup. I tried the Joker makeup from Batman, and that was really hard. That didn't really work well. But I mean, all I had to work with were, plaster of Paris and liquid latex. I mean, that's the materials that were available to me at the time. And you can do a lot with that, but you can't get, I just was always frustrated that I couldn't get the results that I wanted.
Okay. So so there was a period where you were trying to get certain results. You weren't liking what you were seeing necessarily as much. At what point was there a breakthrough when you started to get designs that you were happy with?
Well, yes. The weird thing too is that while I was doing makeups, I was also dealing with puppetry. Like I made a Audrey 2 puppet from Little Shop of Horrors, and I made a Gremlins puppet. Like not the Gizmo, not the Mogwai, like an actual gremlin puppet. I was very interested in puppetry. I couldn't get to Dark Crystal level, but I was, so it's always been a kind of a weird thing where I'm interested in makeup and the special effects and the illusion of cinema magic, no matter what that might be, so I was never just like, I want to do makeup only, it was very all over the place, kind of.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I don't know. To be honest, I never really was happy with a lot of makeups that I was doing until, I don't know, 12 years ago, to be honest. I mean, I was still doing them for Halloween and stuff, but I was always unhappy with the edges because I was dealing with latex, and this is before silicone. And I was doing some foam latex, which is really brutal. And I can't believe, like if you use foam latex, which is a 3-part chemical that you mix up in a what do you call it? Like an egg beater type thing, you make like a meringue basically, and then you put it in your molds and you bake it in the oven. And technically you're not supposed to use the oven for anything else afterward, because like the chemicals and stuff. And of course, I'm using it in my parents' oven, and I don't know, no idea if, I somehow poisoned my family or myself by using it anyway. But I did something, I know, but who knew? And I'm pouring like plaster down the like kitchen sink, I probably clogged some pipes on that. But thank goodness my parents were supportive about the whole process, which is really nice. They could have been like, don't, and then they would have, very artistically frustrated.
Yeah. Could you take us through some of because I hear you mentioning, and I'm not an aficionado with makeup effects at all, but some of the different materials, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. Can you just tell us what is maybe bad, what is maybe okay, and what is maybe good in terms of materials? Like,
well, all materials, not all materials, all makeup prosthetic materials are safe for the body once they're, like foam latex, for example, is not really dangerous.
And I don't necessarily mean bad for the body. I just mean in terms of results.
Oh, well, the difference between like, okay, so back in, when everybody starts out, everybody uses liquid latex prosthetics. And that's just thin. I think everybody knows about liquid latex. You can stipple it on yourself. You can use cotton or Kleenexes or tissue, to make some wrinkles and stuff. And then you can also use it to make some simple prosthetics and then kind of blend it in. And there's still a use for it. But then foam latex is really the key. That was a big breakthrough I think they actually developed it they didn't use it in the Universal Studio. Well, I think they might have used it for the Wolfman. That might have been one of the first, or the Wizard of Oz, maybe. But that is a very soft, pliable foam that you bake and then you can apply that to your face, and then it's it's very soft, and you can blend the edges quite well, and it moves with your face incredibly well because it's so soft. Imagine just like a very soft sponge, like shaped like a, and so that works. That was the industry standard for like 50, 60 years. Like The Exorcist, Little Big Man, all Dick Smith's and early Rick Baker stuff. And then silicone came out, and silicone is nice because it's semi-translucent and it's very soft as well. And that became the industry standard. Now, the difference is that foam latex is opaque. So you have to paint and use makeup very carefully to make it look translucent, because skin is translucent, semi-translucent. But silicone is naturally semi-translucent, so it's more realistic. So that's pretty much the industry standard now. But again, but it's heavy, and that's the trade-off. The foam latex is opaque, but it's light. Silicone, and it's also breathable because it's porous. Silicone is non-porous, so it's hard. You can't breathe through it. Like sweat has nowhere to go. So you got to be careful with that. And it's heavy, but it is translucent and it moves very well. So it's kind of a trade-off. Like what's the right material for the job? Like, you want to use watercolors, or do you want to use oil paints? It's kind of one of those things where you kind of have to judge per project.
Yeah. What point did silicone take over? Are there some movie examples that maybe show the difference?
Was
that in the 80s, I think, or was it they were still using?
They might have been experimenting with it in the 80s, but I don't think it really came into play until the 90s. I'm trying to think of a really good example.
Because I know, what was that Eddie Murphy film?
Like The Nutty Professor, or
yeah. Was that silicone? That's the whole
I don't think so, to be honest. Okay. I got to check on that, but
okay.
I think that was still foam, but was that the 90s? Or was that
okay? I believe that was. I want to say that was the 90s, but I could be wrong.
It might have been. That's a good question. It might have also been a silicone skin with a foam backing, because there was so much weight and so much density, because to create the fat, like if it was all silicone, that would be so heavy that like I don't think he could have worn it, But again, all these pioneers, of the that's one of the things I love about special effects as well is, at what point in time did some random guy in like the 30s figure out like, hey, if we take this foam, or like a cushion foam that from this industrial supply company and squish it into a mold, we could glue it on someone's face, like that's so weird, when you think about the pioneering aspect of that. Same with silicone, it was obviously had industrial purposes, but somebody found it and was like, this is an interesting material. What if we used it for, and I love that inventive, pioneering, experimental aspect of this industry as well.
Yeah. So you were in Michigan in your childhood, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And at what did you where are you based now?
I'm in Minneapolis.
Oh, Minneapolis. Okay. So what point did you transition over to the new location?
Okay. So, long story. Again, I mentioned that my family's very Christian and very religious, and all my family went to this college in Grand Rapids, Michigan, this Christian college called Calvin. It's a very good college. And I went there because it was just kind of assumed all, Dutch Calvinist family members go there. So I went there, and this is also right around the time when I was very disillusioned because of the CG revolution.
So this would be in the 90s, right?
Yeah, this is like 95.
Okay.
So, Jurassic Park had come out, Terminator 2, and I could see the future is like, oh boy, what have I done? I've wasted my life, doing special effects and puppeteering and stuff, and everything's going to be computer based. And I was like, well, I don't know what to do, So I went to this college for a couple of years, and I was going to get a degree in fine art with a minor in philosophy. And I'm like, wow, that's employable. Boy, might as well just apply for a job at, Burger King. Anyway, so a friend of mine wanted to leave after 2 years as well. He wanted to go do art design at this place called Columbia College in Chicago. And I looked into it, and I saw they had a pretty good film production program. And I'm like, if I can't do special effects, I want to work in movies. And so I left with him, and we moved to Chicago, and we went to Columbia College. And then I started studying film production, and kind of was just doing special effects on the side, and just for Halloween and on my own, and wanted to focus on making movies. So I was there for a few years and got my degree in film directing, and learned a lot about how movies are made, editing, lighting, directing, obviously, and that was invaluable in hindsight. I think that was a really good move, because a lot of these special effects artists that I've, I guess, read stories about in the past kind of learned filmmaking on set, through their special effects stuff, for example, if you want to do like a certain gag, you kind of have to understand, well, here's how it should be done, or how it could be done in 3 cuts, but it's got to be 3 cuts. You can't do it all in one, and you can't shoot it from all angles, so you have to understand a little bit of the filmmaking process. And that, I think, was my main takeaway from going to Columbia College. So that was awesome. And then I met a girl, and she lived in Minneapolis. And so after we graduated, we moved here together. And so that's how I ended up here.
Okay. So had you been, doing any films, between, let's say, when you were really in love with the makeup effects and the puppetry and disillusioned with CGI and stuff, were you like working on films throughout that period?
When you say working on films, do you mean, I was making my own little short films.
Yeah. That's kind of what I meant.
In music videos and stuff. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
And all the movies that I would work on, I wanted to include some sort of special effects, practical makeups or puppets or something, for sure. And yeah, but again, it took a long time to kind of acclimate to a new, I guess, film production scene, in a new city, kind of thing.
Yeah, because in Minneapolis is I've never been there, but what is the scene like up there?
Oh, I love Minneapolis. I think, it's still got the big city feel. Chicago is intense. It's just such an urban landscape, and Minneapolis, you can get that urban feeling, but you still got the kind of rural feeling, or the suburban, but it's very, liberal and artistic. And I think Minneapolis is, I really like it. A lot of good artists here, for sure.
Okay. Did you have plans at all to move to LA, or were you thinking about that? Was that an option for you?
Oh man, everybody and their mother, sorry, used to ask me that. And it's just like, especially now, it doesn't really matter, because of the internet and, seeing what you can do and traveling. But back in the 80s, you had to go to LA to do that. And so I considered it, for sure. But I don't know, something about what I love about the process of special effects and filmmaking is the different arts involved in it. for special effects, for example, there's sculpting, there's painting, there's molding, there's hair work, there's application, there's so many different things to, mechanics if you want to do a puppet or animatronics. Filmmaking, same, there's editing, lighting, there's so many different facets. And I just couldn't lock into one. And if you went to LA, you kind of got, especially maybe back in the day, maybe back in the 80s, if you went, you could probably be a do-it-all kind of guy. But when I kind of like in the late 90s, early 2000s, if you went to LA, you would be, I guess you'd have to be specialized. Oh, you're a sculptor, you're a painter. Okay, or you're a foam runner, or, and I don't want to just be, I'm way too interested in all the aspects to pick just one to be good at,
Right.
I mean, granted, I'm not really good at any of them because I am, but I like them all and I'm trying, but it's just too fascinating to pick just one. And that's what it would be. That's what it would have been to be in LA at that time. And I just didn't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I hear you. When I ask that, I'm definitely from the perspective of don't necessarily move to LA just because that's the thing, because everybody moves there.
Right.
And you have so much competition, and it's, again, yeah, like you said, it's so specialized. I kind of made that mistake. Same deal, like early 2000s, I moved to LA and
oh, really?
Yeah. Did the whole thing. Wanted to direct, write. Didn't work out very well. And that was because it's a very big pond and you're a very small fish.
I was just going to say, you can be a bigger fish in a smaller pond in Minneapolis.
Exactly. And that's good for people to know, because I think, the tendency is to look at the glamour of it and go, oh, it's LA and everything is out there. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the problem though. Everything is out there and you aren't necessarily invited at first.
Yeah.
So it's probably better to make a name for yourself in a place where you can have a support system and get something that you're proud of, so that LA comes calling you.
That's always been my attitude. It's like when people say you should go to LA, I'm like, no, LA should come here, or and again, I always felt too that the competition was so high, that like I had to hone my skill way more. I to be honest, I still don't think I'm, I'm sufficient, but I have aspirations to be, I still want to learn and grow. And I still don't, the people that I admire, I don't think I'm quite there yet, at their level. So I still have a lot to learn and practice.
Who do you admire?
Oh, about, obviously Rick Baker. Do you know any of these people? Like Steve Johnson, Kevin Yeager. Yeah.
And then there's because I've been watching
Rob Bottin.
Rob Bottin. Yeah.
The Thing, that's still on. The Thing is not, still hasn't been touched, and I don't think.
No. I agree with that. Greg Nicotero is another one that I know of.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. Because I've been watching the Dead trilogy recently. Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead,
nice.
the Dead, and I remember seeing those movies as a kid. I was never, I was always a big film fan, but I would get scared by certain horror movies, but not that many. Maybe Alien. And that's a whole other level of just artistry, and it's beautiful but also terrifying. But sorry, I've been watching the Dead trilogy a lot recently, and watching a lot of the behind the scenes stuff and trying to figure out, because George Romero is a great hero to a lot of people, including me, because he just was he was in Philadelphia, I believe, or no, he was in Pittsburgh, and he was doing his own thing. He was an independent filmmaker. Even when he made this huge hit, Night of the Living Dead, he stayed there. He stayed in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I admire that.
Yeah. And again, Hollywood came calling him, but it was fascinating to see the process of how you create these makeups for these zombies, because they obviously had tons of zombies and they had to make them all up and they had to do it quickly.
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
takes some time to do that stuff. And watching Tom Savini work and be so passionate about what he was doing and be so into it. And the results obviously speak for themselves, but it was interesting to see how the makeup evolved over the course of the three films, because in Night of the Living Dead, it's obviously black and white, and you can the makeup works for that movie because it is kind of a almost an abstract kind of visual style.
Yeah.
And then
And they were
Dawn of
just
the
using
Dead.
like clay. I mean,
Yeah.
it was amazing what they were doing. I mean, nobody knew what they were doing, in that
Yeah.
movie. Like, it was like the wife of, and one of the actresses, that were doing the makeup on that. It's like, what should we use? I don't know. Should we just put some clay on them, and some like, chocolate syrup and, stuff like that. It's amazing. It's so good.
Yeah,
And then, yeah,
absolutely.
Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of
Holy
the
crap.
Dead, you can see the evolution of the makeup. It's not
Yeah.
quite up to the standards of today, but for the movie it works because it has this quality to it that almost seems like the zombies are from just like another planet or something.
Yeah.
And then you see Day of the Dead and it's like, oh, it looks so much more realistic. And
Yeah.
but it's also,
Savini's masterpiece for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like you also, you talked about, and I've been focusing on the makeup effect stuff, but I also know that you do the puppetry stuff. So then this is a big pet peeve of mine for the industry in terms of how they've been moving away from practical and going into CGI. Like you talked about Jurassic Park. That movie came out, and I'm sure the entire industry of effects people freaked out because they could just see their jobs vaporize. I think who was it? I think it was Phil Tippett or something. When he saw the test for Jurassic Park, he was like, "Yeah, I think we're extinct."
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a great line, and it's partially true. I mean, after that, you just saw an explosion of just CGI, and then it became a band-aid that they just sort of put over things. And they would farm things out to different effects houses, and there was a sort of a lack of cohesion to a lot of stuff.
Right.
I don't know. A lot of it seemed kind of just thrown together, and it didn't seem to have the passion that you saw with some of these other movies where the effects maybe weren't on a grand scale, but you could tell that they focused on them quite a bit. And because of that focus, they even would tailor certain shots to those makeup effects and puppetry sequences. Like you said, you have to have a sort of a filmmaking background. Oh, we have to know that we have to shoot it from a certain angle. We can't shoot it from that angle, but maybe we can pull the camera back and make it look this way. And when you're doing CGI, it's like, oh, we just do whatever we want. So
I don't.
Yeah,
I think that's I think that's a kind of a. Nowadays, it's kind of a. I don't know. We'll fix it in post, that classic line, or we'll deal with it later, I don't like that mentality. I don't know. Call me old fashioned, but like the oh, we'll just CG that, we'll fix it, later. It just that's nice to have that option, I mean, but to really plan it out and a good CG character. I mean, I'm telling you, man, I don't know Jurassic Park was one of the first CG movies, right? Or first,
yeah,
and it still holds up. I mean, when I look at that T-Rex, I'm like, man, and that intercuts with a live, 40-foot animatronic T-Rex, and it works, and it still works, and it's some of the best CG still. I don't know. So that's awesome, and I think that's the best of both worlds, personally. But just to rely on one or the other, I mean, if you're, again, I'm using the term of painting or something, if like you're starting with oils, but like maybe, some, I don't know, watercolor or something, or, vice versa, might help here, like let's make this the best possible painting it can be with whatever tools it takes. That's the most important thing. But you got to understand what your advantages and disadvantages are per medium and work with them accordingly. You can't just rely on one, if you want to look like an oil painting, you can't just use watercolors, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it, I'm of the opinion that a good mix is the way to go, like you said, because
whatever it takes to make the effect, but yeah,
sure. I just do not like the total reliance on CGI at this point.
agreed.
I think that and then even that stuff is kind of tricky because even if you watch something like Steven Spielberg, you know, tinkering with ET and the whole the
Oh my
puppet and the
God.
putting CG on the face and it just became cartoonish. So it's like the original puppet works for that specific movie, because
Yeah.
it's designed for that. So if
Right.
you take that out of time and then you plaster something that's modern onto it, it just doesn't look right because it's
Agreed.
not. It's yeah.
Or
Same with the
Star Wars. Yeah.
same with the Star Wars movies. It's
Uh,
like those movies are of a time and a place, and that's perfectly fine. They are what they are. But I think Lucas's desire to make them how he saw them in his head before he made them, that's fine if you want to do that. But this sort of push that he had to just delete the originals and say, "Oh, those aren't the real versions," and it's like, well, bullshit, because those original versions have a lot of artistry in them. They have a lot of craft.
yeah, and you're kind of messing with the public consciousness too, or public.
Yeah,
I mean, the movies once they're released, kind of become out of your control, and they become again part of
public consciousness.
a bigger
Yeah.
thing, so don't mess with it, man. I mean, I don't know, that's not true. I mean, I guess I admire anybody who wants to revisit their work. An artist's work is never finished, it's just abandoned. So
And I have no problem with it either. My issue is more just give people a choice,
yeah, I know. Yeah,
and Lucas just didn't want to do that.
right,
Yeah, he was just sort of, well, these, your memories don't exist. They don't matter. This is what I want. And it I don't know. I became very frustrated with that because I admire him as an artist, and I respect his ability and decision to go back and make it the way he wanted. That's great. But also I didn't like the fact that he refused to release the older versions on like Blu-ray and things like that. And it's like, well, that's different. I mean, that's not right. I don't think that's fair to the
right,
people who especially made you who you are, because the audiences are what made Star Wars in the first place, so that you could make Empire Strikes Back and you could get Skywalker Ranch and all these other businesses going. So yeah, I mean, this whole conversation is basically just talking about the industry at large and how the push from practical to CGI is not. I don't think it's been super smooth. I mean, you look at something like Avatar, and I think that's a little different because, I mean, that's so massive that of course, you have to use CGI for a lot of that stuff.
yeah.
Um,
Avatar is
that
like the CG Dark Crystal.
exactly right. Yeah, that's an example of a movie where it's like, oh, I can totally see them why they would do that, or something like, you know, um, the Fast and the Furious, where like you have cars jumping through buildings and going between buildings. Obviously, you can't do that stuff for real.
Right.
But
Well,
there. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, good CG has certainly opened up avenues of amazing storytelling and movies. Like, they've been trying to make a Spider-Man movie for years, and I don't think you could have made a Spider-Man movie. What was it, 2003 when
2002.
when
Yeah.
the Tobey Maguire Sam Raimi movie came out?
Yeah.
You couldn't have done it without CG. No way.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So now, okay, we got some, a new avenue for opening up stories,
Yeah.
a new tool to open up bigger stories. And so that's great, and I'm very excited about that. I mean, look at like the all the Avengers, I mean, the Marvel movies in general. I mean, fantastic stuff. But what people still don't understand too is that, like, well, maybe not understand, but maybe don't realize, I guess, is that, like the head of Thanos, for example, was a highly detailed sculpture by an artist in real clay, and molded, and then that was scanned, and then altered. So there's still a relationship between artistry and craftsmanship and CG. Just because you don't see the actual foam or silicone head on camera doesn't mean that like there weren't incredibly skilled artists. And I'm not also, belittling the incredible work that CG artists do. I think that they're getting a bad rap, a lot, like, oh, CG, no, they're still incredible artists,
Sure.
and doing really good, amazing work. It's just different. You're in front of a computer, like with ZBrush or I don't know, whatever programs they're using. And as opposed
Yeah.
to, sitting there with clay and a sculpting tool. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we
I
all want
think
the
that
same result.
exactly. Yeah, and the individual artists are incredibly talented, and I think they deserve a lot of credit. But I also think that it's unfortunate because a lot of times they're used as almost a sort of a blunt object, and they're not
Sure.
as part of the filmmaking process as much as they are just sort of a part of a farm. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we need a guy to do shading, and shading is great. You got to be skilled to do shading, but it's like, well, maybe he should interact with this other person who's doing this. So that these people are in separate rooms a lot of times.
Yeah,
And I just think there's a separation that that leads to kind of coldness, I think, to a lot of these effects.
I agree.
Yeah, and you can just feel it when you watch the movie. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, this was done by 5 different effects houses, and you know all these different people, and it's great that they have jobs and they're doing artistic things, but I think that as a whole it's leaving me a bit cold. And I didn't get that as much when they were doing things more practical. Not that you have to do practical for things that are impossible. Obviously you can't, but I think just there's a whole attitude of the industry now is more leaning towards, I don't want to use the term slave labor. That's too harsh, but just in terms of just like these farms of people who are just sort
Yeah.
of doing things, and they're just kind of employees, and they're not necessarily.
Yeah,
And
it's like the heart and soul. I do truly believe that like heart and soul reads on camera. Like you can tell when a person is not motivated, but passionate, and an artistic endeavor. And it reads. I think it truly reads on camera, or somehow like leaves a residue on camera or something.
Absolutely. It's the
And
difference between an actor who gives a shit and an actor who's just kind of half asleep. Like you can tell, you can
yeah,
just see it
yeah,
you can see it in the performance.
yeah. I agree. I
Yeah.
mean,
And now all that stuff, from the top down, it goes all the way down. It's like, what do you do? And I did not see the remake, and I kind of refused to see it because I just didn't want to tarnish my memory of John Carpenter's masterpiece. And I understand his movie was a remake of the other one, but
yeah, the Howard
his
Hawks
movie
thing
was,
from 55.
yeah, but the thing was, the John Carpenter thing was closer to the original novel. So I kind of look at it that way.
Yeah,
And I think the remake of that was just more like, well, let's just show what happened like before the thing. And it's like, I don't really. Did you see it?
yeah, yeah.
Did they use mostly CG or what was
Yeah,
it?
yeah. I think that was a major missed opportunity to go back to pure practical and shoot it just all practical and actually use that as a selling point. There's no CG in this movie, and people would have been like, "What?" Because in the CG age, they could have got some stuff on camera that people would have lost their minds over. And if you watch the behind the scenes, the making, Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff Jr., their company is Studio ADI, they did some unbelievable effects for that movie. Unbelievable. And most of everything they did was either replaced or augmented with CGI.
Oh wow,
And it was heartbreaking, I think, for him.
wow, wow.
But if you watch, like, there's tons of YouTube videos on the behind the scenes practical effects of the making of the, or the, making of the remake of, or not the prequel of the thing.
Right.
And it's fascinating and so amazing. It's so good. So good. So much artistry and so much talent and so many. I mean, it's really, there should be documentary just on what they did, like a full-on documentary, and why they changed it. I just don't get it. Like, was
Yeah.
it the director? I mean, was it this, the producers who were like, no, I don't know. I really don't understand. I think they could have shot that entire movie practical, and again, that could have been a selling point. I'm still waiting for a selling point of a movie, as there is no CG in this film, like a big budget movie, and then people be like,
Yeah.
"What? Really?" Like, because you could
Yeah.
pull it off. You could do it. The technology
Yeah.
with practical effects is good enough these days that like you could do it.
I know the same thing happened I believe to Steve Johnson on Where the Wild Things
Oh,
Are. I know that
yeah.
they were building all those like things, and then Spike Jones was like, no, I want to do a CG or something like, and
Yeah.
it was he, I think he like lost his company or something over it because he needed that money. And it's just, again, it speaks to the whole state of the industry. It's like all these amazing practical guys are just getting their hearts broken and their businesses closed because, Hollywood, they want to go more for I want to be able to manipulate every molecule of the, image. And it's like, I don't know. It's just, honestly, it's up to the director, obviously, but I just think that that's such a shame. I mean, especially if you're a big fan of the thing in the first place, you got to be a fan of the practical stuff. So it's like, why, as a filmmaker, would you get involved if you're just going to CG the whole thing? I don't get it.
Part of the whole appeal and love of the thing is the fact that, of course, it's all practical because, again, it's 1982. There is no CG. You can do some optical effects and stuff, but I mean, yeah, it's just, oof. That was quite a slap in the face on that one. But yeah, I think Steve Johnson, though, I mean, he did a giant Hulk, like the original Hulk movie. They did a huge Hulk puppet that they didn't use. He also did Spider-Man 3. He developed a lot of Venom effects. Didn't use any of them, I think that, and similar to Rick Baker, like I think his final straw might have been like the Wolfman, that remake with Benicio del Toro. And it was just like, I got some good effects here. You don't want to? No, you don't want to try any of these? You don't want to shoot them? You don't want to? Okay. They did the makeups, but he had transformation effects ready to go. And I think it was just disheartening, just producers wanting to. And again, I don't think it's cheaper in the long run. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it is cheaper to do CG, but what's the trade-off?
Yeah, I think if it is cheaper, they're probably just farming it out to the Philippines or something where they don't pay. I don't know. Where they can just get away with cheap labor. I mean, that has to be it. Because I know in the golden age of CG, when you had all the effects companies here, that's when it was like really expensive. And it's still expensive, obviously, but I think now they're just farming it out to places. Some of these places I've heard, I'm like, well, God, what are they paying those people? Like,
right?
Because I know they don't. Those types of places, they're not paying them hardly anything, probably. But yeah, so and one of the good things about J.J. Abrams doing Star Wars was, I think the Force Awakens was a lot of it was practical. A lot of those creatures, and he wanted that practical, and God bless him, because he is one of the few people who can obviously make that decision. And you could tell when you watch the movie, you could see it. You could see, they're the actors in a real place with that creature. It's there, and they're interacting.
Well, it also it just helps the actor as well. I mean, it helps. I mean, there's so much. I think we learned from the first episode 1 and 2, Attack of the Clones, and the Phantom Menace. That it just, you can't just put actors in a green screen and expect them to like, all right, now there's a monster over there. Look at it. It just doesn't really. You can't get a performance. In my opinion. I don't know. Maybe good actors. They are good actors, though. I don't know.
I think there's a link between acting ability and your ability to actually see what you're acting.
Or react. Yeah.
Reacting to. That's one of the things that Richard Dreyfuss said that he hated about his performance in Close Encounters of the Third Kind was he said that, he did all Spielberg would say, oh, it's a big UFO flying by your head, but he couldn't see it obviously because they had the optical in later. But then when Dreyfuss saw the movies, like he was upset because he's like, if I had known it was going to look like that, I would have reacted differently.
Oh, really? I guess I've never heard that one. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, no, it's a great movie, obviously, but Dreyfuss wasn't super happy about it because he was like, I feel like my performance would have been better if I had actually seen all this stuff. And that is a testament
Sure.
to an actor and their ability to react based on real things versus a green screen or whatever. So and I don't think that Hollywood is particularly concerned about acting a whole lot these days. Obviously they want good performances, but just giving actors stuff that they need, versus just kind of throwing a green screen up. It's like those decisions I don't think those decisions are based on an artistic starting point. And,
no, it's always based on money.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are creative solutions that you can come to where you can have something that financially makes sense and also artistic sense. But I don't know if they either have the ability to do this or want to take the time to do this. And that's kind of disheartening, especially now because everything is going streaming. And I think that's just going to push the industry in a lot more towards doing CG. And because again, if it's on people's TV screens, it's not going to make much of a difference anyway. Maybe on a giant screen, you could make the argument, but on smaller screens, I feel like that's more of an excuse for them to just side with CG more than practical.
Well, the two things that I think are happening right now is that a lot of people know how to do practical effects, and a lot of people know how to do CG, and so that brings the cost down. And ultimately, when there's a lot of competition, of course, the cost goes down, and then it's a matter of relationships or who's better or who is more passionate or something, or and then the secondary part is again cost, like you said. A lot of movies, like you said, there's so much need for content. Like you got to push it out. So the price goes down for everybody because you got to just make a movie, get it out there. Like here's what we got. Can you do it? Yeah. Because somebody else will do it if you don't. And it's just kind of back in the day. The ILM was the hero of CG. Back in the day, Rick Baker, Stan Winston. All those guys were the heroes of practical. And now there's a lot of people who know how to do it. So,
I think there's a resurgence definitely of film fans who are fans of the old style of doing things, and I think I definitely do see a bit of a comeback in certain areas with
certainly
practical stuff, and that's where you come in, obviously, because you are doing a lot of practical stuff. And I think it's again when I look at your avatar, that just looks scary to me. You know what I mean? Versus something that's like, oh, we'll just put a CG zombie in there or whatever, or just do some crazy non-physical thing. It's I think that there's a difference for sure. And I don't know. I just appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, there's something about also a unique artistry. You could, I don't sense a lot of unique artistry in CG because so many people work on it. But like you can definitely tell, like, oh, I think that's a Rick Baker movie, or like, oh, that's definitely like a Stan Winston movie. You almost want to see what their crew and what their artistic, like Tom Savini for sure. You know what I mean? Like that's definitely a Tom Savini movie. But you kind of want to see their artwork, and what their unique vision is or what they bring to it. And it doesn't have to be like ego based. It's just a matter of it's just the art, that they bring to it. And I think that's really interesting and fascinating. And I hope that I don't know. I can't really think of a CG company or situation really that's like, oh, that's definitely, you know, God, I can't even really name one besides ILM. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
me
you
neither.
know what I mean?
All the usual suspects back in the '90s are definitely closed. I think like Digital Domain and Blue
Yeah,
Sky
yeah,
and
yeah.
ILM still going, but that's obviously I think
Right.
Disney. I don't know if Disney owns them now. I don't know if they were still part of Lucasfilm, but
That's a good question.
yeah, I don't know. Not sure, but I'm pretty sure ILM. I think they're still around. The granddaddy, they're still kicking and stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's a lot of it is literally just these, and I've heard stories where they'll start an outfit for a particular movie, an effects whatever house, and then they'll do that movie and they just close because
Yeah.
they can't maintain it.
Right. Like what was
Because,
the was it the Life of Pi? Didn't they
oh
get
right,
nominated for like an Oscar
yeah,
and then
and
they
then
closed, you know, like
yeah, yeah.
because they just we can't
They
do
were
it.
owed a bunch of money and then they didn't
Yeah.
pay them or something, and so they had
Yeah.
to close, and then they protested the Oscar ceremony, I believe.
Oh, did they? I did
I
not know that.
believe that I'm pretty sure they protested in some form or fashion because they weren't. It was an atrocity, and
Yeah.
that's just an example of how those people are treated. I think it's the same in the video game industry too,
Mm.
where you have these, they spring up. We want to make a game, okay? So they just hire a bunch of people and throw a couple $100 million at it. Pay them maybe a decent salary, but then after that they're unemployed, and then they
Yeah.
kind of just have to go on and find other work. And since there are so many people doing it, I'm sure the competition is tough. But I mean, again, back in the day, it was like ILM was ILM, Blue Sky was Blue Sky, Digital Domain was there. Digital Domain, you had a job, you had you had what could amount to job security as much as you can have in the industry, but there was a place for you to call home. And I don't think you have that now, with any
Yeah.
CG house anymore.
No, it's all the
So
bottom line. It's all like money, who can do it cheaper.
yeah, and
And
that's
everybody's competing against each other because who can do it cheaper and who can do it better. And it's,
right,
it's not a,
and faster.
yeah, and yeah, that's right. Faster, you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that speaks to just a whole. It's not just the fact that it looks, you know, doesn't look as real or good as practical. It's the whole philosophical, ethical part of it too. It's all one thing to me. So that's why I wanted to have you on, because I wanted to sort of, I guess, if you call it, air a lot of grievances that I have about this part of the industry, and how they're treated and how it affects the movies that I watch. Because so many of these movies, I mean, I'm watching them and I'm just kind of like, it's passive. It's passive. It's in one ear and out the other, because it's all digital. It's all CG. I don't know. There's just something that is not super engaging to me about it, especially if the story's been done to death. But when you watch something practical, like I saw the Thing again on the big screen, and this was years ago, but it totally works. I mean, it just,
Yeah.
no matter how many times you see it, it's like I'm engaged in this because I know the actors are there. They're afraid of this thing, and it's real. It's going to get you. I don't get that with CG. I just don't.
Yeah,
Um,
not really. I mean, I feel like again, the hype between working together, I think you can achieve some amazing
sure.
results. For example, the most easy example I can think of is like Walking Dead. I think it was season 1. Like with the half rotten girl crawling across the grass.
Yeah.
Like that's great. Like remove her legs. Wow, that's a great effect.
Oh,
The upper
sure.
half is like all practical, but then just remove her legs. And you're seeing something like, how'd they do that? Like again, in my opinion, it's all like it's about pulling off a magic trick. And if people can be like, how'd they do that, then you've won.
Exactly. Yeah. Another great example is Forrest Gump,
Oh,
when
sure. Yeah.
he's in the wheelchair and
Yeah.
he got his legs blown off. So they literally just CG'd his legs out.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love stuff like that because that's part of the storytelling process. It's
Yeah.
how do we do this? And instead of just sort of, oh, we'll just take care of it later. No, we need to figure it out now
Right.
because we have to have them move a certain way and all this stuff. So yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, the best stuff is when you really can't tell. It's like a mixture of CG and like
Exactly.
Jurassic Park. Yeah,
Exactly. That's
you know,
yeah, totally. And again, I think that kind of what we've learned from the CG boom of the 90s and early 2000s, you know, and then the resurgence of practical is that we got to work together. You know, we can achieve some amazing results by figuring it out in conjunction. So
yeah,
that's what I think that's the way to go. I don't think one way is the answer.
Yeah,
unless you want to do that as an artistic, you know, on purpose, you know, like, oh no, I want this to be like for sure CG and know it, you know, like, you know, that's one thing. But
well, there's that movie Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow,
yeah.
where that was clearly meant to be CG because that's part of the aesthetic of the movie. Yeah, no, it's exactly. So it's like, oh, that makes sense.
If you want that aesthetic, that's cool. But yeah, otherwise, same with practical, you know. And a lot of people also just don't have access to, you know, CG people, you know, especially at the level of filmmaking that, like, you know, music videos and short films, you got to do it practical, you know. I mean, there's not a lot of CG people that I know of, at least in Minneapolis. There's a, you know, my friend Peter West is a great example. He can do a lot. And, but he, again, always wants to work in conjunction with practical. Like, what can we do? You know, for example, like, I'll make a creature. Like, we're working on this movie now where, you know, I made this this creature, and, you know, I'm thinking like how I'm going to puppeteer it, how I'm going to make it work, and blah blah blah. And we did do some puppeteering against green screen, but then he scanned the whole thing into the computer. So it's like, and then he can make it move and do whatever he's got to do with that creature in the computer. So that's cool because, again, at least I got to make it, design it, you know, paint it, you know, all that. But now he can do whatever he's got to do to it, you know, to bring it to life. And that's, you know, I think it's a healthy compromise. At least it's not completely one or the other.
Yeah. No, that sounds really cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Hey, man, thank you so much for having me. That was really fun. I love talking about this kind of stuff, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I loved talking with you about it. Yeah, no, it was a great conversation. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man.